7 for the Dwarf-lords in their halls of stone. Greetings and well met, my friends. Yoistin here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth on this fine day. Today, I wanted to discuss what we know of the 7 Dwarven Rings of Power and their effects, as well as where they ended up. Today's will likely be a shorter video, as there isn't much lore on these rings, but we will talk about what is there. Let's delve right into it. Around the year 1500 of the Second Age, during the time when most of the remaining Noldor dwelt in Eregion, Celebrimbor forged the greater 16 Rings of Power, the Rings of Men and Dwarves, under the tutelage of Sauron disguised as Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. The crafting of these rings were planned by Sauron, as they were meant to dominate the minds of their wielders, and he oversaw their creations, unlike the circumstances describing the Elven Rings of Power. I'll link my video on the 3 Elven Rings and my video on the Dwarven houses in the description below and the cards above, as they relate to this video. There were 7 Dwarven Rings, metal bands set with single gems, likely one for the king of each Dwarven house. If Sauron could master the Dwarves and most of the men of the Second Age, likely he could have overwhelmed the elves of Middle-earth before Numenor's faithful or any emissaries of the Valar could intervene. If Sauron was successful, that might actually make for a good theory video sometime. Anyway, this was Sauron's plot, and as we know with the 9 rings and the Nazgul, it was a plan that held potential. However, Sauron did not account for one thing: the hardiness of dwarves. Accounts state that, after recovering the rings of men and dwarves, Sauron gave the rings directly to the dwarves. But Dwarven traditions state that Celebrimbor gave Durin III his ring personally, while the others got their rings from Sauron. Durin III was the heir of Durin I's line, the Longbeards, and at the time before the downfall of Eregion, he was given the most powerful ring of the 7, later known as Thror's Ring. He was also the king of Khazad-dûm. Sauron failed in his attempt to enslave and ruin the children of Aule the Smith, and all of them proved resilient to the Dark Lord's intended corruptions of the 7 rings, as they are the hardiest of all folk. It is possible that some of the passive effects, like longer lifespans, occurred, but invisibility and diminishment into the Wraith world, some of the effects of the One Ring, did not happen. However, there were still effects placed upon them that Sauron did not expect. The Dwarven kings who wore these rings were subjected to greater greed and lust for gold and other treasures. I imagine many of the ring wearers acted like Thorin did within Erebor after Smaug's death in The Hobbit. But the 7 kings and their descendants were able to use their rings to expand and greaten their hoards, at a cost of their own virtues. After the creation of the One Ring, around 1600 of the Second Age, Sauron the Deceiver sent armies to Eregion and began the War of the Elves and Sauron in 1693, hoping to conquer the Free Peoples. This conflict would trap the dwarves in Khazad-dûm from the west side. Eventually, after the dwarves received their rings, Sauron learned that they would not convert to his faction and fall under his sway, and so he began his conquest to reclaim the 7. This was to cause the dwarves more ill fate and conflict, and the dwarves would strive to get them back. That way Sauron would be able to at least do some damage. However, the power that came with the 7 rings also inadvertently helped Sauron in some ways. It's possible that some of the rings caused the dwarves conflicts within their own factions, due to greed and rulers without virtue. And of course, we must not forget the dragons. Whether the power of the 7 drew the dragons to dwarven halls directly or indirectly as the fell creatures looked for hoards, and the dwarves with the largest hoards also had rings of power, the dragons would invade the lands of the dwarves one by one, destroying or consuming their rings of power, meaning that these rings were far less durable than the One Ring, if they could be destroyed in these ways. By the waning centuries of the Third Age, 4 of the rings had been eaten or destroyed by dragons, and 2 others had been taken by Sauron. In 2845 of the Third Age, Sauron would claim the final and most popular ring, Thror's Ring, of the line of Durin, after capturing Thrain II, the father of Thorin II Oakenshield, and imprisoning him in Dol Guldur. Thus, by the time of the War of the Ring, no dwarf held a ring of power. The Council of Elrond would confirm to Gloin that, indeed, Thror's Ring had been one of the 3 taken by Sauron, as many dwarves believed that it had been lost in Moria. Gloin too tells us in the Council of Elrond that a messenger from Sauron came to Erebor and offered to return the 3 surviving Dwarven Rings that Sauron possessed, and even Moria itself to the dwarves if they were able to find the One Ring and return it to Sauron. This the dwarves would not do, nor would they reveal anything about its former possessor, Bilbo Baggins, the forever hero and friend of the dwarves. Thus, the dwarves of Erebor and their king Dane Ironfoot chose virtue over greed, and heroism over gold. I know that some people think that the dwarves are only out for gold and themselves, but this is a moment that proves they are far more virtuous and loyal than that. This offer made from the messenger is the last we hear about the Dwarven Rings, and the 3 remaining ones were likely kept in Barad-dûr, if they indeed remained at all, and they were likely lost in the downfall of the Dark Tower after the One Ring was destroyed. It's also likely that, just as the Elven Rings did, the Dwarven Rings would have faded and even failed in power after the destruction of the One. Even though the 7 rings did not enslave the dwarves, I would say that they were still an overall detriment to the folk of stone, as they increased their greedy traits, deterred virtue, and brought about their sorrows that were engineered by the dragons of the world. Sure, the dwarves grew wealthier because of the rings, but what is gold when your home is aflame, and loved ones flee the wreckage? Luckily, the dwarves of the late Third Age chose valor over betrayal, and love over wealth, and they were better for it. I think that there is a lot to learn from the tale of the 7 rings. Ultimately, we see that wealth isn't everything, and it is better to earn it in an honorable way and maintain our integrity, instead of taking the fast and deceitful routes to power and fortune. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all liked today's video. If you did, please hit that like button and share this video with a friend. Let me know your thoughts about the 7 rings and what we may learn from them in the comments below. I think that this is a fascinating story that doesn't have too much impact on the main narratives of Middle-earth, but is very telling of its characters. If you'd like to contact me more directly, join us on Facebook and Twitter, and to more directly support the channel, please consider donating to Patreon and buying some new merch. Links for all of those are in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I will see you all again next week with a new series. I will be doing part 1 of what the Fellowship of the Ring movie cut out from the book, so please look forward to that. This Wednesday, I will be live streaming at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'll be giving away a commemorative coin made by a friend of the channel, and I hope to see you guys there. Please check out the video of my friend making that coin and his channel. Links are in the description, and I'll see you guys next time. As always, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.